It is time to start our 11 a.m. panel. Of the one thing that we've done in preparation for the event that fell through the cracks is Dr. Blight bringing the cowbell from the Gilder Lerman Center to ring to get everyone's attention in the auditorium when it's time to start. I'll do better next time. Panel number one is titled Florida University Faculty Under Fire. Our moderator is Dr. Julie Buckner Armstrong, professor of English in the Florida Studies program from the University of South Florida. Dr. Armstrong.
Good morning. Good morning. Much better. I get it for a short person here. So our first panel, I want to thank Mike Butler and Flagler University and all the many partners who have helped to set up this. After Dr. McLean's talk, I feel depressed, enraged, and empowered to keep the fight going. So thank you everyone for being here. Let's give ourselves a hand before we even have the panel. Okay. So Florida Faculty Under Fire, we have a wonderful group of presenters here, and I will introduce them and we will go in the order in which they're in the program. And to presenters, remember our time limit's 12 to 15 minutes because we want to have good conversation afterwards, and we do have a wonderful timekeeper here who will keep us all honest. So first, we have Professor David Canton, who is Director of African American Studies Program and Associate Professor of History at the University of Florida. He graduated with a BA in History from Morehouse College, received his MA in Black Studies from The Ohio State University, and a PhD in History from Temple. Professor Canton is the author of Raymond Pace Alexander, A New Negro Lawyer Fights for Civil Rights in Philadelphia. The biography examines Alexander's role in the civil rights struggle in Philadelphia from the New Negro to the Black Power era. The book won the 2011 W.E.B. Du Bois Book Award from the Northeastern Black Studies Association. And Professor Canton is also a co-author of Radioactive, a memoir of advocacy and action on the air and in the streets. Second, we have Professor Robert Cassanello, who is an associate professor of history at the University of Central Florida. His book, To Render Invisible, Jim Crow and Public Life in New South Jacksonville, won the 2014 Harry Moore Award by the Florida Historical Society. He has also produced and directed many films that have won awards from the Suncoast Emmy to a College TV Emmy, and they include The Committee, Filthy Dreamers, and Marching Forward with Dr. Lisa Mills. And third, we have Professor Adriana Novoa from University of South Florida, my campus as well. Her research focus is science in Latin America. And with Alex Levine, she has written 2 books about Darwinism in Argentina. She's currently completing another manuscript, which will treat the politics of evolutionism and its relationship to gender and race, from virile to sterile, masculinity and national identity in Argentina in 1850 to 1910. And last but certainly not least is Professor Darius Young, who is from Florida A&M University and is a historian of 20th century U.S. His research interests focus on the interrelationships between race and politics during the long civil rights movement. His first book, Robert Church and the African American Political Struggle, was published by University Press of Florida and won the C. Calvin Smith Book Award from the Southern Conference on African American Studies. His current book project, Freedom Now, Detroit and the Black Revolt of 1963, explores social and political movements that led to the emergence of Black power in that city. So we have a wonderful slate of presenters, and I am going to turn the floor over first to Professor Canton, and I think some people are going to speak from their seats and others might come up here, but here we go.
Yeah, I'm muted. Yeah. I think it's a mute. Okay, I'm in. Here we go. All right. So I'd like to start. So I came here in 2020 during COVID, and obviously when I got recruited at University of Florida, knew about its academic reputation, but this is all before the politics. And there's two main questions: is AP African Studies and African History. As director of the African Studies program, the AP African Studies course was going to be a way to, streamline students from there to our major. But as you know, that course was declined in January by the Florida Department of Education over 6 areas, right? Critical race theory, intersectionality, reparations, Black Lives Matter, Black queer theories, and Black feminist thought. Right. So currently right now, allegedly College Board was critiqued for caving in. They revised it. They're going back and forth. But the reality is I don't really see the state of Florida budging on those issues. Right. This whole Stop Woke Act stuff is really having an impact on K through 12 and really having an impact on us as a program, because we're going to get our more majors from that discipline. The African History course is all about interpretation. In other words, you can teach African history in the state of Florida, but is it going to be a sanitized version, right? Or is it going to be an American exceptional version? So in other words, you can teach Rosa Parks because that happened a long time ago. And in 2023, the segregation as we know does not exist. That's the argument. Or some like to believe racism does not exist. So you can teach Reconstruction. You can teach, Brown versus Board of Ed, but that was in the past. As of 2023, there's a Black president. You got some Black faculty. Racism does no longer exist. That's the version they want, right? Where you feel good, right? Come out there, someone's like, watching Oprah, everybody's happy, but really not a critique of American systems, institutions, and ideology. And on the other side of it, this whole notion of showing both sides, I think the argument is that when you take African history, this emphasis on racism doesn't talk about quote unquote Black accountability, right? I think that's what they're really trying to say without saying it, right? When we talk about, the gaps between Blacks and whites, well, Dave, you have to talk about the role of Black accountability, Black culture, hip hop, baggy pants, tattoos. So I think that's the debate, right? So you can have the history, but is it going to be sanitized or is it going to be history, where it's nuanced, complicated, critiquing institutions, right? That's the discussion we're having in terms of African history.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. I think we believe all the best scholars steal, so I'm going to steal from David Blaine earlier. Except I was never a big fan of William Shakespeare. However, there is a bard I think that speaks to this moment, and that's George Clinton from Pain. And his song Funkentelically, he said, "We cannot afford free speech," right? And he ends this song with "Heads I win, tails you lose," which I think is what Chris Rufo and Governor DeSantis is trying to tell us, and we have to resist that in every way that we can. So what I kind of want us to think about, I'm one of the, Adriana and I are two plaintiffs in two different cases against the Stop Woke Act, HB 7. And so I want to talk a little bit about my experience with the case. And I think probably our experiences are different to some extent. So I'm interested in hearing your experience. I came first, thank you. I'll have that on my tombstone somewhere. He came first. Being the first plaintiff, and I believe I was deposed before your case had started. So I actually had to sit in a 6.5-hour deposition with lawyers for the state of Florida, the Assistant Attorney General of the state of Florida, and the lawyer working with me on my case. And they had to scrutinize my teaching. And it was a pretty interesting experience because the first part of the deposition, the lawyers for the state of Florida, these were hired lawyers, these weren't attorneys who worked for the state of Florida. They, were trying to just create questions that would make me admit that I would never violate HB7. And so we went kind of back and forth in that. I think they really didn't get very far in that. But about halfway through the deposition, they asked me this question about, I don't remember how it got to the point, but it was something to the effect of how I acknowledge the race of students in my class, right? And I said, I don't understand what you mean. Where you're getting at with this? And they go, well, you have students in your class, how do you communicate to them based on their different races? And I said, well, I don't. I said, there's only one race. There's the human race, and they just kind of freaked out. They just flipped out and they wanted to nail me down on that idea and what I meant by that. And so I just explained in very plain terms the idea of the social construction of race. And I said, there's no biological origin to race. It's a social construct. I said, the definition of race changes over time. And you can attest to this. The definition of race changes in places, right? Especially around the world, right? Well, but the way it's constructed is differently across the world. And how could that be biologically determined? And they were just pulling their hair like, I don't understand that. And they kept saying, I don't understand this. I don't understand this. And we just kept going back and forth. And unfortunately, the conversation sort of ended with the lawyers for the state of Florida saying, if what you're saying is true, how do you explain Black people's hair? And that's yes. How do you explain Black people's hair? That was their evidence of biological determinism. And this is about an hour and a half going back and forth on this debate with them. Because the purpose of the deposition was to remove my standing in the case. One of the other things they said is like they asked me like what the race what's her name, Rachel Donizal, right? They said, what's the race of Rachel Donizal to me? And I said, I don't know. So whatever she says it is, I have no problem with her self-identifying. That's not my business. I said, and I'm not the police of race. So I don't police other people's race. That's not my job. And so they used this testimony that I gave in their filing to remove me as standing in the case for a possible injunction. And they said that I have an incoherent idea of what race is. Right? Sort of, Dr. Cassanello would never violate HB7 because he doesn't even know what race is, right? Like it's just completely clueless. Like I think they actually used the word incoherent. I have an incoherent view of race is what they said. And so when that went to Judge Walker's reply to that was, this has no merit. I read over the deposition and Professor Cassanello's definitions of race not only makes sense to me, but seems to be mainstream. So Judge Walker's going to dismiss their motion. And so I think that's sort of at the core of where we are here with HB7, what conservative lawmakers are trying to do. They're trying to control the conversation. They're trying to control what we can and cannot teach. And I know when HB7 was a thing before the injunction, I walked into class. I was teaching the history of the civil rights movement at the time. And I walked into class and I did this legitimately. I walked in and anytime I believed I was violating HB7, I stopped for a minute and I said, okay, I'm about to teach you something that is in violation of HB7. I think you should know that. If you want to report me, get your pens and pencils out, start recording now. I'll give you Governor DeSantis' email address and you can submit it to him personally. And the students would just laugh. It was the funniest thing. They were just rolling on the floor. And I did it a few times because I felt I was violating HB7 in those moments. And the students couldn't figure it out. They couldn't at all, this makes absolutely no sense to them. And I was kind of successful on campus getting a group of students connected with student government the same semester to pass a resolution protesting HB7 against, protesting HB7 concerning their own education. they explain this is an affront to us as young people who want to be educated, and they passed this resolution, made a little bit of media at the time. I can't say I was prouder. And they actually asked me to come out to student government to talk to them before they passed the resolution. And they asked me a bunch of questions and everything. I think it was so far the proudest moment I had over the HB7 thing, because as mentioned, I'm a historian, and I've actually been researching throughout my career some of the things I've been involved with deal with academic freedom and public universities. And what it made me recall are two events specifically. One at Faneuil, I'm sure my colleague here probably knows this very well. The removal of I keep blanking on his name, President blanked on his name. From 23.
You said our president?
No, not your president from 1923. Young, thank you. I always forget his name. From at the time was in college, but the governing board of college universities at the time were control that president at what was Florida College stopped teaching the liberal arts, stopped teaching science to young African American because they felt that it made no point. Right? Why teach students that didn't have quote unquote the capacity to learn those subjects? And we refused. Jen said, no, I'm not going to do this. We're a college. We control our curriculum. And he was fired and replaced by somebody else. And the students there protested. They ran out into the campus. They ran into the Capitol. They protested. Similar thing happened with Florida State College for Women when the legislature was passing bills to ban the teaching of evolution, ban the teaching of George Bernard Shaw, curriculum and sexuality, things like this. And those students, those young women, protested. They protested to the universities, and so for me, it was the same moment. I think with this HB7. So I was kind of, I wasn't as strong. I was kind of glad to see them, and I told the students as much. I told them these stories, and I said, "Now you're the next iteration of this protest." And I think they took that very seriously. And since then, and at least at UCF, there have been vigorous dialogue with the student body to protest these incursions into the curriculum.
Very nervous about being here because I'm a historian of the 19th century, Latin America, historian of science. This is completely new to me. I never crossed into the 20th century, and I'm now into the 21st. So my talk, I wrote it because I feared that I will be mumbling here and I will not bring anything important to say. My name is ADRIANA NOVOA. I'm one of the plaintiffs who won the injunction for HB7. Yeah, I'm too tall. I am an ADRIANA NOVOA. I'm one of the plaintiffs that won the injunction for HB7. And thank you. But Robert, as I said, was the first, and I have absolutely no honor in doing this because I turned down fire 3 times when they contacted me. And they contacted me because a student actually was the brave one who wanted to go and challenge HB7. And he has organized the First Amendment movement on campus. And when the lawyer said, okay, this is it, we try hundreds of people, nobody wants to challenge this law. So it's either you and the student or we are not doing anything. And I felt so ashamed as a professor that a student will have more courage than I, that I finally decided to join. And I joined that, and I warned the lawyers. I was not deposed, by the way. I said to the lawyers, I want to do it on my terms. I cannot speak about US history because I have no idea about it. And I cannot really dispute this from the point of view of the disadvantages of teaching US history. I want to do it about what I know, On one side, of course, I'm a historian of science and deal with evolution. And the other one, I had a particular experience in my own country with issues that are related to HB7. So I said I could not teach Latin American history. And I mentioned to them two things that were clear to me. I said, look, I teach about Catholicism. Catholicism is totally involved in collective guilt, is one of the things that we believe. This law doesn't let us discuss even collective guilt. So I will violate the law just because I will talk about Catholicism, which is ironic because the governor is a Christian. So that was one of the things. The second one is that I have a very traumatic experience growing up in Argentina because I grew up in the 70s and I had to face a horrific dictatorship. And I said to them, which I've totally confirmed, and I think part of our success is I had that experience. I cannot discuss the legal strategy, but, you know, it was me. I know what these people are talking about, and I know what is going on here because I grew up in this kind of politics. I grew up in censorship. I grew up in everything that is coming on here. And I explained to them that for me, the key thing that will help me with this case coming from Argentina is the fact that I grew up as the result that the right split when before my time in the 50s in Argentina. And you had a Catholic nationalist movement that it was very much related with the one in France. And at the same time, it was also the one who split when the traditional, what you would call real conservative here, 19th century liberalism. So that split of the right explained to me a lot of the things that I was seeing in the United States, and also why Latinos can see the extreme right appealing in some contexts. The thing is that when I was growing up, this Catholic nationalism was the party of the cross and the sword, the party of the warriors for faith. And they also merged with that the French counterinsurgency that it had declared international war against communism. And that communism was the threat that was present in this global anti-communist war. And I thought, well, this is very, of course, that the biggest problem that we're facing is that Western civilization needed to be saved from all these communists, and more importantly, being saved from the colonial subjects that were revealing, and they were one independence. And all this is what it was very much informed me in the 60s. I was born in 63 when I was in public school. Was all these clashes between radical left and at the same time Catholic nationalists, and this idea that very much we have an internal enemy. I grew up in the years that the fantasy of the internal enemy was based on French counterinsurgency, was developed in Argentina. And I'm convinced that people in the right are following what happened in Latin America, because it's eerie to me that I listen sometimes things from the governor of Florida or other people that sound exactly the same as I was growing up. So the idea when I was a child, then and when I turned, for example, 10 in 73, is we have an internal enemy. That internal enemy is Marxism. It's international. It's a league that is destroying our civilization. We want to be Western. And of course, it's a myth that Argentina is a white country, European, and it's not Latin America. So there was this call to very much the left wants to make us poor and wants to make us less white and want to make us Latin America. That was part of the things I was hearing when I was growing up. And the military present themselves as the patriots who were doing counterinsurgency in the name of saving us from an ideology that was evil. And at the same time, they wanted to destroy us, and they wanted to destroy the nation. And they became disappealing, very much like it happened now with the MAGA movement. that is eerie to me, because they call the military dictatorship, called their project National Reorganization Project. And they went back to the old liberal ideas of independence and the constitution that was signed in 19th century. So all this is my background when I was going, and I think into this lawsuit. And I started informing myself about the right. And this is, I think, one of the problems that we have to face, that we have no clue how the right has evolved ideologically, and how many groups that are very savvy in something that I grew up with, which is counterinsurgent tactics, particularly the idea of how to manage public opinion and how to create and scare people into terror about an enemy that wants to destroy our life. And one example for me of a very savvy person who does that is Christopher Rufo, who says that he's inspired by the 60s, that he's inspired by Che Guevara and you know, the guerrilla warfare and the tactics used by the left. And I have a brief word in Twitter with him, and I call his ideas vanilla warfare as a consequence. He didn't like it and blocked me, but the point is that the issue here is that what he's learning is that you can, using counterinsurgent tactics, using manipulation of the civilian population, as the military did, make people believe in a reality that doesn't exist. And you can manipulate people into certain things, like we are in a war with Christianity, which I heard when I was a child. We want to oppress Western values. We want to give in to this enemy that poses a threat to us. We want to destroy democracy. And the military dictatorship said, we are giving this coup because we need to save democracy, which is very similar to the logic that is being used here in this state now. When DeSantis needs to be a super powerful leader because he needs to save us from this scare that doesn't exist, because there's no Marxism in Florida. And the most crazy thing is that the university system was created by Bush. This is a conservative. We have appointed boards that are conservative. So the whole thing was a complete fantasy that didn't represent anything that exists in reality. So how that happens, how people believe that these things that don't exist, exist. And I lived through that, as I said, in childhood, and that's what helped me in this lawsuit. I said to the lawyers, bring them on. If they want to depose me, I am very prepared, because they need to argue with me about Latin American history. So I will be delighted to do that. And they will not need to argue with me about science in 19th century. I welcome that. They didn't depose me. But they hired, by the way, two lawyers, not two historians of Latin America. I don't know who they were, that were in the trial with when I went to court, to advise them about my case. So what I think I want to tell you to close is that this is something that is not only horrible, but it's something that works. The fact that I was the only person that hundreds of they tried, and they did it, and I said no 3 times, because I said I'm not I'm not a U.S. citizen. I was not at the time, and this should be fought by U.S. lawyers. I mean, U.S. professors or people who are interested in the U.S. And it shocked me. It shocks me to this day that nobody did it. I cannot have standing I want to challenge this other laws. I don't have a legal standing because I don't teach U.S. history. So I'm waiting for somebody who will decide to do it. But I will close like this. It's very telling to me and our profession that the plaintiffs that needed to stand up and fight in many places, not only Florida, are not coming up and challenging this law. And some of them expressed to me that the reason for doing is that they are fearful. Thank God we are still in the democracy. So for the life of me, I don't understand why people are fearful of challenging this. Thank you.
All right, good morning. First, I do want to thank Mike for the invite. It's always good to be back here at Flagler, and I commend you for all the work that you and your team have done for bringing us all here to St. Augustine. I'm a little bit seeing David Blight and Nancy McLean, who are fundamental to my training as a historian and the work that I have done. So, and Gilda Lerman is here. They gave me a fellowship as a grad student, so I appreciate that support. I want to start by just saying, when we think about this moment and everywhere that we've, traveled, every conference that we've attended, especially outside of the state of Florida, people are asking, how are you going to respond in this moment? What are you going to do? Can you even teach your classes anymore? And it's important for me to convey to them that, yes, this is my academic discipline, but Black history for me is extremely personal. And I can't teach what I teach, have the conversation that I've had with my parents, grandparents, and even my great-grandparents, and understand their experiences and cower for 1 second in the midst of what we're currently facing politically in this country, and especially in this state. It can be a bit of a conflict too, because I'm also at the only state-supported HBCU in the state of Florida. And HBCUs have a reputation, like our friend Jelani Favors in his book, Shelter Time in the Time of Storm. Dr. Ellis is a historian of Black colleges, and that's why I look to him as soon as they asked about Black presidential history, because he's an expert on that topic. When you read their works, you understand that Black colleges, but more importantly, Black students have played a pivotal role in understanding the Black freedom struggle, especially throughout the 20th century, but especially in the civil rights movement, which is a course that I'm currently teaching at FAMU. But it also is a precarious situation because HBCUs can tend to be conservative in the way that they deal with politicians, especially a governor like DeSantis, because the schools are typically strapped for resources and very dependent on the state for every last dime, and you can't compromise any funding by seeming to align with something that you would think HBCUs would be aligned with, right? And that's not a knock on our administration. It's just us understanding the way that game is played. But for me as a professor, and as someone who's moving out of an administrative role that I'm currently in to thoroughly be in this fight, we have to do everything we can to teach the students who chose to come to FAMU. Because when folks ask me as soon as everything broke, everybody was calling, every news outlet calling, how are you going to teach at FAMU? My response was, you need to talk to Dave Canton. Because I could tell you the students that came to FAMU came here for this reason. And I'm not going to deprive them of that experience. In fact, if anything, this moment has put a battery in my back to make sure that we articulate the issues that Black people face in this country even more. Provide more opportunities, more programs to feed that desire in the students are flocking and wanting that information. We can't deprive them of that. So instead of just saying what I may do, I've been talking to folks about what I have been doing, right? I was a part of the development committee for the AP African American Studies exam. One of the 16 faculty and teacher who helped write it before everything went crazy. My name was on the document, which meant I had a target on my back here in Florida. And you can imagine people are reaching out to me, people are asking me what was my role, public record requests, everything throughout this entire year because of my name just being on the document. right? His movement is to create fear and intimidation so that you will self-censor, that you will cower, and that you will give this kind of mundane, apolitical story of the Black experience. But that hasn't been my response. This summer, we were lucky enough to get an NEH grant. I partnered with my friend at the Children Defense Fund Freedom Schools, and we organized a K-12 Teachers Institute entitled Centering Youth Agency in the Movement. And we brought teachers, including teachers from Florida and across the country, to Alex Haley's farm in Clinton, Tennessee, to teach the movement. Our keynote speaker, Dr. McLean, was Dr. Crystal Renee Sanders, my good friend, right? And we're from the student. And we had scholars from across the nation come and teach the movement. And that was the question. We understand, you know, it was a difficult situation to be in because we don't want to put teachers in a situation where they are literally maybe fired or even worse, have to face some sort of legal ramifications. But we, in that moment, tried to ease their fears and said, if you teach the information, we'll make sure that you have the documentation. We'll make sure you have the facts to support what you're doing. And that institute is a success. We're going to do it again in 2025, hopefully. Last week, I had the privilege of being a co-chair for the Association for the Study of African American Life and History Conference. And I reached out to a good professor, scholar, Dr. Jean Theo Harris. She reached out to me because she wanted to do something with the film. And we kind of collaborated, put our heads together. And we said, we're going to make sure we have Florida educators in that room. And we worked with the Zen Project to give away copies of Young Reader's edition of her outstanding book on the rebellious life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. I was thinking, I said, man, the way Rosa Parks is remembered, just this old lady on the bus, we should just create that course for the state of Florida. They'll approve it, right? Let's create a course on Rosa Parks. They're like, hell yeah, let's do that, right? If you only knew who Rosa Parks really was, so, right? And how much we could cover and what we would cover in that class, right? So for me, it's not, you know, it's been difficult. And you understand the challenges that you're facing. And we could talk about what our governor is doing and Rufo's the intellectual behind this whole movement and all these things, but we also, for me, it's not necessarily getting in a fight with these folks for this brief political moment that we know will pass, right? Us as historians know what we have to do in order to organize and study history in order to understand the current moment and to try to prevent it from happening in the future. So we have a foundation. We have an example and examples to look at in order to deal with this current movement. So I know we're going to be victorious. But it's also to just move forward with business as usual. And to make sure that we are super serving our young people, our educators, and continue to tell the story of Black folks in this country without any type of edits, without any type of political influence. That's what I've been doing in my class. That's what I'm going to continue to do. That's what I'm going to continue to do outside of the class. And I think there's a lot more of us who are like-minded than the folks who are controlling the narrative today now. And today is a great start for us to continue that movement in the future. So I'll go ahead and stop there for now.
Am I on? I am. Excellent. I want to thank each of the panelists. It's particularly important, I think, to hear these perspectives from the personal to the historical to the international, because when you put it into, this war on education into these different perspectives, you see that, it's a playbook or a battle plan. And, and if that is true, then the converse is also true, that fighting back, there's a playbook for fighting back. There's a battle plan for fighting back. And we know how to do this from various social movements. And, that includes using the legal system, student protest, having alternative forms of education, freedom schools. We did one of those in Pinellas County as well. And so we have strategies, we have tactics, and we can do this. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to the audience for questions for our wonderful panelists. And who would like to go first? Do we have microphones in the? Oh, okay, excellent. We have someone back here, blue shirt.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on something Darius said and comes through, and what Adriana said as well about few people wanting to join the lawsuit. There is a goal here that is self-censorship that Darius mentioned. What's your experience of how successful that is? I mean, do you have colleagues you think who have said, yes, I'm censoring myself? Or maybe you could just give us a sense of, where that is compared to people who are here and talking about these sorts of things.
Well, yeah, I do have colleagues who have altered their syllabus. None of us know what they want, right? Like, it's all vague on purpose. And so people have self-censored, self-edited their syllabi, right? And I understand it. I'm not critical of folks because people are trying to survive in this moment. And, Dr. Ellis is a colleague of mine at FAMU. One of the things that we talk about often is, as opposed to criticizing some of our colleagues, we're at a HBCU, and not a lot of our colleagues have had an opportunity to really establish themselves in the field. And so we understand that we may be in a more privileged position just from the work that we've done outside of our campus, which may give us a little more freedom. So in case they do fire us, I can say, hey, Crystal, can you reach out to Nancy and they got something that do, right? And, I need a job, right? But I'm not saying it's been overwhelming, but some people really have. And especially in our general ed courses. I teach an upper level civil rights course and a research course. So it hasn't affected the way I teach yet, but those who are teaching 4 or 5 classes a semester in an intro level course, right, are doing what they have to do in order to survive. And so it takes individuals who have friends like Dave and other people who we can lean on to say, hey, I need the academy to have our backs. Because what we can't do here in Florida is give in, right? That someone has to stand defiant and someone has to continue to do the work that we're trained to do, right? Yeah.
Can I say something about this? I promise myself not getting emotional about this, but one of the things that is really upsetting to me, I'm not as upset as DeSantis or any of the people who represent other interests as I am to my colleagues. Because I'm convinced that this is a reaction here in Florida, at least, of the George Floyd movement that started in campuses and mobilized a lot of young people who were not political and scared, them very much. I saw colleagues who put the Black Lives Matter and all those things and, all the thing about George Floyd, they're terrible. as soon as we get hit with that, start to removing those things and cleaning their offices so they would not be suspected. And that is profoundly disturbing to me, because I believe that academic culture in this country has become I don't want to sound like a right establishment, but that they have become enablers of this, because we have been controlled by the corporate culture that wants to deal with these issues, not as traditional groups like Latin Americans or Black groups, that is resistance. They want to deal this as we can work around it. That was what colleague said to me. Oh, I'm upset that you put this on us because now we will be a target. It would have been better to work around it, because that was the message. We can work around this. And then I ruined it because I had a lawsuit. I personally, and the future president of the American Historical Association is here, I was very offended that the American Historical Association didn't send me a letter with 2 words, thank you. And that they didn't even, offer immediate help to tell me, we will sign our amicus brief in your name. Nothing, I never heard of them. So this needs, what is happening forward in the United States needs to make us reflect what a collective failure of these institutions we are experiencing, and why people who has incredible privilege. I want an injunction in 6 months, okay? I'm not facing people like in my country who lost their lives and were kidnapped and tortured. We have this privilege and nobody is exercising that. That is what I think is the theme, not the scientists, not the craziness, but the silence and the enabling. Thank you.
Amen.
If I could follow up, Adriana, I want to let you know, before all this, I had a life-size cardboard cutout of Karl Marx in my office. I still do, and it's kind of a tourist attraction for students. They come by just to see the life-size Karl Marx.
We are the only.
cutout. Maybe, just maybe. So along those lines, there's one thing that I want to mention is that the fear is now the mechanism for implementation. So HB 7 taught the Florida legislature that if they actually put teeth to the legislation, there would be lawsuits. And I think the HB 7 lawsuits are on some level scaring the state of Florida. And so the very next year when they did what you all heard in the news is HB 999, what eventually was passed was SB 266. There is no enforcement mechanism to that. The Board of Governors is not doing an enforcement mechanism. Our universities are not doing an enforcement mechanism. And they're both sparring off of each other. The Board of Governors is saying, do an enforcement mechanism about the curriculum to control what's being taught. And the university is telling the Board of Governors, you do an enforcement mechanism. And they're both trying to avoid lawsuits. And it's all in the grand design of the legislature, because now that they say, we just passed the legislation and the fear will do the work. And that's what's happening now.
He's doing it.
Yeah, I like to add, I have an example for my program. So we had a course, it's called Black Horror, White Terror, and the college fixed. Right-wing hag reached out to her. Why does the teacher talk about what is whiteness? What is queerness theory? And that's part of a course. And we decided not to respond. They reached out to me 3 times, reached out to her. So the college fixed, the Daily Mail and Fox News put out the same story on the same day with the same talking points. And you realize, because if you respond, it doesn't matter. They're going to still go their direction. But we knew it was the end of the semester. It was not going to be it was May 8th when it came out. She's still teaching the course. It's a popular course. So in that case, little minor victory. She's untenured, so she was nervous. But by not responding, that was a strategy. Now we have another course called Black Lives Matter, which came out 2016 during Black Lives Matter. So I have a professor that teaches AI movements and social movements. I said, why don't you teach the Black Lives Matter course? But he's untenured and he was concerned about the blowback. I'm tenured. I said, all right, we'll rediscuss this point. But I get his perspective because we have to publish the syllabi online, and then, public records requests, anybody can go online and see Black Lives Matter, dear Professor so-and-so, I'm gonna get all types of emails, all types of calls, which is fine for me, I'm tenured, but for untenured faculty member, I don't want to put them through all that just starting out. So those are decisions as a director you want to make. So far we've been kind of under the radar, but you're always thinking about that, right? What's the title of your course? But you're still doing it, you're still teaching the same work. You're still doing the same books, the same pedagogy, right? But like I said, it hasn't been enforced, but you just start thinking about those as you put these programs together. And it's like I said, it's fear, right? The backlash. I was on media so much last year. But again, in terms of, my last point, like when I teach Dr. King, we're not going to get the sanitized version. I'm still doing the same thing I'm doing for the last 20 years. And most of my colleagues are doing the same thing. So we've managed to, keep going the way our program, remain committed to a discipline, and just taking things as they come along.
And can I just add one thing? Again, those issues are coming closer, just in terms of the intimidation, it's coming closer and closer to campus. We obviously saw what happened at New College, which was a travesty. An article came out recently about SAS at UF and his mission to make this a more conservative university. We see what's happening at FAU, who went through a Florida Atlantic University, who's going through a presidential search, ruled out one of our governor's minions, and the whole search now is suspended as they are trying to figure out how to get him back into the pool, right? I mean, so again, when we talk about this culture of fear, it's not just in some far out, boogeyman mythical place. It's literally, we see how it's becoming institutionalized through even the leadership of our own campuses. And so when we talk about these type of woke police or cultural police, whatever you want to call them, again, it's not necessarily us worrying about is somebody in Tallahassee at the Capitol is nitpicking. These folks are slowly but surely infiltrating leadership positions at the university by design.
And sorry, I want to remind people who ask questions, please introduce yourself before asking your question, so we'll know who you are.
So I'm Jessica Wright, and I'm the Director of Education and Implementation with Florida Freedom to Read Project. That is a volunteer position, though. In my paid role, I'm actually an educator at Florida Virtual School. So I work in the K through 12 realm. My students are 9 through 12, and I also develop curriculum. And so I just want to also say how gratifying and validating it is to be in this space and to hear you guys talk as really much more senior to my experience, that you're experiencing a lot of the same struggles. And, so my question is, in, my current role, I train teachers. I'm a clinical educator mentor and a state assessor. And over the last 2 years, it's become increasingly difficult to advocate for accurate history and to not self-censor, and to encourage my colleagues to do the same, and the teachers that I'm training. And just as kind of a quick example, we just developed a new Holocaust studies course that launched in June. And I primarily wrote the last module, which was titled Never Again. And it's to teach kids how to recognize these fear-based efforts, essentially, and how can you speak up? How can you have a role? And frankly, we went all in. And I'm really proud of what we put out, but like many of you, I'm on a short list as well and pop up in those public records requests. And so, my question is, when we're dealing with overcompliance and self-censorship and sanitization of history, how do we encourage these teachers that are now incoming and, in this environment of the shortage, and, nationally, we have 30 to 40% less people enrolling in education programs. how do we get them to have the confidence to speak up and do what we know is right? Like, how do we navigate those conversations? Because frankly, I'm finding it harder and harder. Not for myself, I kind of stay out here pushing the envelope, but for them, when they're really concerned about putting food on the table. I mean, how do you do that in the K through 12 where we have the Board of Education and not the Board of Governors?
I mean, that's a great question, right? I mean, the bottom line comes to this. So if we're teaching Dr. King, the K through 12 teachers, right? Can we go to, where do we go from here? Cancer Community, the last book. And we know in that book, he talks about, poverty, racism, democratic socialism. Can teachers teach that in a classroom? That's the billion-dollar question. Now, I bet you that's district by district, whether it's the Panhandle, Miami, the teacher's personal decision, how many years they're in, if they're tenured, non-tenured. But I guess we have to come up with some sort of discussion. How do you teach? Can you teach that about Dr. King, or you just teach the colorblind 63 speech? I think that's the debate, right? That's where we're at, right? So if I'm a K-12 teacher, untenured, I'm new, I don't know how you get around that, right? I mean, I'm teaching that where do you go from your chaos community, because that's part of King's evolution, change over time. That's history. I mean, that's what it is, right? So I don't know. So does that violate a law? Not in my perspective. I wouldn't say so. So I think it's up to the teachers union, to really come out and just ask these questions, right? Even Malcolm X is a conservative now, right? So I think that's what make him a conservative, right? So I think that's the question in the K through 12. Can I teach this specific text? Here's a primary source. This is what Dr. King is saying, and let's fire back, because they say these things, they never have a debate, right? What is the discussion, right? What is the debate? What are we arguing? I think that's the best way to go about it.
If I could,
You're on.
yeah, if I could say for the union part of it, I think that's very important. I believe most K through 12 school systems have a union. I'm president of our union on our campus. And I'll just tell you, knowing what I just said earlier about fear as a mechanism in the last piece of legislation that was passed in regards to this, I sent out a missive Monday morning because I had heard supervisors around the state who were telling the faculty not to teach X, take book off of your syllabus and things like this. As far as I know, it wasn't happening on campus, but I took the opportunity to send an email to all the faculty and say, hey, I heard the story of something going on with it. Please be certain to know that there is no enforcement mechanism for SB 266. No one can tell you not to do something at this point in time. That may change, but right now you have the right to do whatever you want. There's no enforcement mechanism. And if there's some dummy supervisor that tells you you can't do this or you can't do that, document it, send it to me, because I know where the lawyers are. That would haul that supervisor into court and haul UCF into court. And I sent that, to reassure the faculty, but I sent it also as a message to UCF, because the one thing I do know is UCF reads my emails, right? And so I know when I communicate to faculty in my capacity as president, I'm also communicating to UCF, and I want UCF to read that email and to know they on notice if they do start to enforce SB 266, we are ready.
Can I say something to you coming from, I'm convinced that I differ a little bit from what Dr. Marlene said about the purpose of this. I don't think this is ideological. I think the same thing happened in my country in the 70s with neoliberalism, that public education came under attack using ideology, but with the purpose that we have a great system of public education, and it was too expensive. So that was the destruction of it, had to do with them, this mentality. There are winners and losers. The winners will go to the private schools. The losers will go to the public schools will be defunded. And it will be kind of whatever, the kids will be there. And let's put it that way. But the purpose was specific about the issue of transfer of resources and cutting you know, in my country, it's a back and forth. It's always, you know, when government goes, they fund the things, then the right comes, they fund the things. So for us, it's very obvious but the purpose here is this massive moving of money for other things. And it will happen, if I'm correct, because I believe the United States is going the same path that Latin America went starting in the 70s. What will happen in UF is that this president now discovered top ranked university. And he will use this awful word monetized and said, we need to monetize the fact that we are the fifth public university in the nation. And we need to increase our fees and make money out of this accomplishment. So I think people here have not recognized that ideology is doesn't mean anything now. It's just they will use whatever in terms of rebuild themselves to get those laws and the money to what they want to do, you know, to get things. I think that the Koch brothers fail politically because they don't have candidates that they win in the long term, but these strategies is what they work. So I think we in Florida need to be aware of that. And we need to start speaking about the money is for your children. The money is for their education. And particularly with minority communities, who are the ones, Hispanic communities, Black communities, you know, that will be in these schools. And I think it's important to get that. But again, I don't see anything positive to say about this topic.
Yeah, I'll just add that when the law first went into place, my daughter, she was in 6th grade in her science class. They were reading a book about, I don't know the name of the book, something about the secret life of plants or trees or something like that. And the law went in effect, and immediately they had to stop reading it because it was, I guess, under review. Because in that book, they talk about how trees reproduce, and that can be viewed as pornographic. Literally is what the letter said. So, I mean, we're talking about Black history. This is a STEM science class about trees, right? So, I mean, so it's been crazy. The only thing I would add, Professor McLean mentioned earlier about school boards being the key, right? The Moms of Liberty are at every damn school board meeting, every county, everywhere. They have the loudest voices often in those meetings. We can't just have the conversations in spaces like this or with each other. We have to take it to them. And we have to show that we're here to protect our kids the way that they perceive them protecting theirs. So the school boards will be key, along with everything my fellow colleagues have mentioned.
Yeah, just add one thing about Florida. I think the secret to Florida is tuition hasn't gone up in a decade. You know, their whole thing is keeping that tuition. That's the magic of Florida, right? Low tuition, get out debt free, get in the gated network, get a job. That's what they're measuring. Since we're a red state, if you want to do that blue stuff, go to Berkeley. We want UF to represent the politics of the state, right? And I think that's what I think the issue is, right? If you want that, look, go to SUNY Bloomington, go to Berkeley, go to UCLA, but UF is going to be leaning towards a moderate to conservative, when you come out of here, right, agenda that represents the state of Florida, because we paid for 1.3 billion comes from Tallahassee every year for our school. We want to reflect that. I think that's what the challenge is, right? I think that's what the president is trying to make UF stand for.
Yeah, but you know, the thing that for me was shocking when I went to the court and I listened to the Florida lawyer is this is the legal argument. Public schools are funded by the governor who won. So the governor represents the ideology of those people.
Right.
So the state then has the power to decide what should be discussed in the classroom, because there's no academic freedom, there's no freedom of speech in the classroom, it's state speech. And under questioning, he said, well, the judge said, well, what happened if a communist is the governor? That's fine. The government can do whatever they want. If he wins, of course, we will allow that. Of course, it will be like Latin America. If you have a communist governor, will be cool. But, that is their argument, that the simplification of, and the lie again behind this, that Florida only funds, I think, not even 50% of the schools. Students pay. It's not like in my country, it's not free education. Students pay. Walk students, Black students pay for their education. So they are lying, implying that Florida funds 100%, and that's the reason that the governor has that right. When in New College, these people were paying for their education. So this is the part of the thing that I think we need to at last try in my interviews to clarify for the people. This is not a lie. This is no state money. Most of the things are fees and federal money. And I'm hoping that the federal government will interfere also because this state is dragging a lot of millions of dollars to, for education from the federal government, but they are not respecting civil rights. And they're not. So I hope that at some point this becomes an issue of the federal government and saying, hey, we are giving you the money too. And that is, I think, what will be the next step of this fight.
Have time for a couple of more questions. If we have two hands right here in front, so Dr. Blaine will.
I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your stories and for your courage in fighting on your campuses and for showing the leadership that you have and what you've shared with us. I think really underscores something in the preliminary report of the Special Committee on Academic Freedom in Florida. I was thinking of as you were speaking, and they said that what is going on in Florida threatens the very survival of meaningful higher education in the state with the direst implications for the whole country, right? That strategic ambiguity that the DeSantis administration has used to make people self-censor, to change the culture on campuses is really critical.
So thank you for all you're doing. Thank you also, Darius, for talking about the school boards and the need to go to the school boards. We need to run for the school boards. We need to encourage the people who care about education to run for those school board seats and to be there when these other people are there. I want to put one more thing on our radar, which I didn't have time for the talk, but I think is really relevant, particularly for these questions about higher education. Among the many organizations that the right has built in its strategic way, they have something called ACTA, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. This was another Buchanan idea, but boards of trustees tend to be corporate people, right? People with a lot of money to throw around. And so they organize the trustees and the alumni. And this is a national organization. They are doing many things. I think maybe Isaac Kamola will speak about them later. They're trying, for one thing they're pushing for is alternative accreditation, so that as schools lose their accreditation for what's going on in a place like Florida, they can get this rival accreditation, go to them. But the other thing they're doing is they do private board retreats to train administrators for what they call governance in a new era, right? So this is all about undermining faculty governance, about bringing the bullying power of boards of trustees to bear, et cetera. But anyway, and you won't be surprised that the current head of ACTA is a longtime veteran of Hillsdale College, which of course has quite the stake in promoting its model to monetize all these tax dollars and shift revenues. I'm saying that also because I think that that people need to know about it and see if their trustees are part of ACTA. And if they do find that, I think one of the things that we can do is demand transparency. You know, if you're going to have this organization meet with our boards, particularly of public universities, we have the right to be in the room, right? We need to know what you're saying about governance, our institution. So I think that is another way to move people forward. It was very disheartening to hear what you had to share. And I'm really, really glad that you did, about the complete failure of courage on the part of so many. But I think courage is also contagious, right? And so I think we can also think about doing something that organizers do, one-on-one meetings. Who are the colleagues you think might take more of a step
if you only spent some time with them and listen to their fears and help them find their courage. I mean, we need to think about this like the long civil rights movement organizers did, right? Of how to pull people into more work to avoid this catastrophe. But anyway, so ACTA and that would be my, I guess they're not questions. But
Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one more question, I think. And if you didn't get a chance to ask a question or make an observation, we have lunch, we have lunches, we have breaks. Oh, okay. So we might have time for a little bit more, but if you don't have time to answer a question, come up to us, talk to us, ask us questions, ask them questions. So, so here we go. Up front, I
haven't come back here yet.
It's hard to see out there. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Welling. I teach U.S. History and AP U.S. History at Douglas Anderson School for the Arts in Jacksonville, just north of us. And I appreciate the conversation on fear and what we're experiencing with fear as the educators. But my focus is on those juniors that come into my classroom every single day. And I'm seeing this year after year that these kids know the environment we're in. They're feeling this fear that we are teaching under. And we're losing kids in believing in us that we can make a better world, a better experience for them. So that's my question. How do we do that? How do we not lose this generation in trusting us as adults that we're not going to let the fear take over?
I think Adriana and I are in a pretty fortuitous position because we can sue. And the reason we can sue is because there's no central curriculum in colleges and universities. And so that's the basis of the free speech argument that Adriana was trying to make earlier, that what the lawmakers failed to realize in HB 7 was that there wasn't a way to inject those noxious ideas that had to be taught into the mainstream of the college university classroom because there's no curriculum. There's no centralized curriculum that comes down into our classrooms. So in order for them to do that, they had to enforce it. And with them enforcing it, precipitated the lawsuit. So for K through 12 teachers, they really have it hard. And the reason in our lawsuits, the K through 12 teachers did not have standing in the injunction was because Judge Walker decided with case law that when there is a centralized curriculum, teachers do not have academic freedom or freedom of speech to a centralized curriculum. And that's the problem. I wish I had an answer to your question.
That's coming to us because the legislature passed the law to impose the common requirements. So now the universities need to teach certain classes that the legislature introduced. That's the Florida curriculum. That's yes. That, for example, I wanted to challenge that, but I can't because I don't teach those classes. I don't teach U.S. history. But going back to your basic question, which is for me what the most painful part, which is I have a lot of my graduate students teaching in public schools, K-12 system, particularly those who are in very poor schools have less trouble than those who are in schools in which they target more because, they feel that the doctrinators go after their kids. But the issue there is that I think, and that's the reason my disappointment I expressed before, we are very privileged, okay? In the sense of the protections that we have. Teachers don't have that. And also in Florida, we get paid, the worst pay in the nation, I believe. And now you have a terrible situation because as you know, administrators are quit. There's a lot of, I have a school, for example, in Tampa, that they cancel courses. The students need to graduate, but they cancel because they don't have people to teach them, So I think what they did, and this is go back to what happened in my country, is creating this dual reality. There will be people now, those who will transfer with these grants to private schools who will not have any problem because the irony of this is in the private system, they don't have HB 7. They don't have all the things that we have. So they will continue with their life like nothing happened. And then there will be the other system in which is like another world, that you have poorly funded and you don't have teachers and so on. So the perversity of this is to such degree that it needs to be a collective reaction that, is very difficult because the fear is, your fear is justified, okay?
Yeah.
And that is part of how they're doing these things, okay? And they have examples. They can go to countries like mine and we see how they destabilize and ended a great public system. So the issue is that they're saying to the people who can afford it, oh, they give you the grant, billions of dollars that will put you in the deficit, to go to this private school. So those will be very happy. 30%, I think, of the people in public schools have moved to that. Poor people cannot do it because they don't have cars. They cannot drive, to different areas, and they have a lot of, sometimes they don't have the information. I know a lot of people who speak Spanish only, and they don't even get, all these things. So that is the part of creating this winner-loser reality. And that will be difficult. I cannot tell you honestly, in my country, as I said, it was a lot of resistance, but I don't see that here, honestly, and unions have been debilitated. These laws that they passed for a reason, debilitated the unions. So I think what it will take is a devastating economy or something like that people notice. That can happen. But I don't think that is that is an issue, because a lot of people thinking, oh, great, I can send my kid to private school, the winner's school, and that will go. And the last thing I tell you is that I have a daughter, my husband is Jewish. So when we want to send her, because an accommodation to a private school, we checked the list, they were all Christian schools. There were no choice. I tried to get, upset about it in my house about where she stays in this school, now, but deal with it. I regret it not having sued that. But those are the things that you need to pay attention how it's an entanglement. And the last thing I would say is the conservatives are a genius in being patient and put one law. You don't see it at the beginning, but then boom, you see everything connects. And that is what is happening the last years here. And I hope that we can revert that, being more in helping each other.
For me, I am very sensitive to that issue, right? Because I want to be gung ho and just stand there and deliver, the material, but there are consequences. And my mother, she still teaches in Detroit public schools. And so I know all that teachers do in the classroom, outside the classroom, that never gets noticed. And we have to do a better job as a collective in supporting folks who are in that line of work. I heard you mention, though, that you are part of that you teach an AP course. And when I was working with College Board and developing the Black Studies course, constantly, every time we would meet, I would say, what resources are you going to put in places like Florida to protect teachers? At the end of the day, it's no secret, they're $1 billion nonprofit. I can't count their money and who gets what, but it's a lot of money that gets generated from all of those AP courses and everything else, right? That there has to be something with as powerful of a corporation as College Board is, and all the resources that they have for these teachers to stand and put their livelihoods on the line, teaching materials that institution is benefiting from, that you have a moral reason to make sure that those individuals are protected. And so, you know, I think for us, it's all of us thinking collectively of what organizations, what resources, what is there to make sure that we protect people, because these issues are going to come up, because it's all about just interpretation. It's not logic. It's not, it's anything that people, you know, Hank Aaron, I mean, all types of stuff, you know, just the most mundane things you can imagine has been a conflict. But you know, we have to make sure that we as a collective are protecting our educators who are standing on the front line, putting their livelihoods on the line to teach our children, to make sure that they are equipped. And I think we all could do a better job of that.
That occurred to me, then the future president of the American Historical Association is here, is that the American Historical Association can step up as offer for, you know, the area, social studies area, training and support to, you know, for the teaching of history. You know that Hillsdale is controlling the curriculum of history right now. Now they hire Prayer, and they will use in their videos. So basically they will put play and they will have that. And so I think as I said, institutions, professional institutions need to support the K-12, and they need to support it with the creation of curriculum and the creation of training that can be helping targets like Florida or other states, and, you know, benefit with that.
We have time for a couple more questions, like multiple hands.
Your hands up for a while.
Hi, I'm Natalie Tremblay. I'm a student here. And I just, even though I'm not gonna be in the civil rights history field, I do really want to be a professor, and I was just wondering how, like, my parents are worried about me for going into this, and I was just wondering if you guys were dealing with family and friends who were just like, why are you doing this? Or are you like worried that the younger generation is kind of
Ourselves, you know, I mean, I ask myself that question every day.
Well, I think it's a large issue. I think it's an attack on humanities, right? Because when DeSantis about zombie studies, you know, that's a hit. African studies, ethnic studies, gender studies, those don't get you employment. This whole notion of coming in, free thinking, those other stuff, it's almost like we're coming like a vocational school. You come in, get that degree, get a job, and call it a day. These ideas grappling back and forth is now, on the other hand, they open up this Hamilton Center, Western Classics, right? You know, but that's been funded, right? So what you can do with a Western Classics degree, right? But the challenge is getting into humanities and social sciences. That's a concern because everyone's focused on STEM and outcomes and getting jobs. And most students think that's the only way to get a job is a STEM degree. No matter how much evidence I give about who has BAs in liberal arts and these other disciplines, there's still this fear. So I think, you know, if that's what your passion is, go for it. And these are cycles, as we know, right? These are cycles. And if we look at it, you know, in terms of long-term demographics, we know nationally the Democrats seem to win in except for 2004, nationally where this country's going. We know demographics in the state. So these things are cycles. So as long as you persevere, you know, and stay passionate about what you're interested, get the PhD, but obviously know what you're getting into, right?
I will say, since I was the most negative, I don't want to discourage you. Because, you know, what I think you need now, and I have no problem because I do have that, is the sense that you will need to fight for it. And the sense that you are doing something meaningful and that you will make a difference. I feel that. I mean, I'm doing this, I was skeptical at the beginning and I cowered, as I mentioned, but, you know, probably there's nothing I would do in my life that will be more important than this. Doesn't matter how many books or articles, doesn't matter. This is really something that I see the impact. So if you want a meaningful life, join us. You know, I think that's what I can tell you, and you can come study with me. I will be happy. But this is not your problem. I think, as I said, it's our problem. We are not setting a good example for young people. And I learned this lesson myself, you know, and we need to set the example that what we do matters, and matters beyond the bubble of being a professor, matters for the students, for their lives. And that is what I want you to keep, because again, if you have that call, you will have a wonderful life. I do feel, I mean, I'm sorry that I complain so much, but I love what I do. So we are in a moment that for people like me is the best, probably, you know, but you need to have that desire to see this beyond the profession and something that is absolutely meaningful for society.
And I'll say, you're in good company, because no one knows why we chose to do the things that we do. If we're being honest, right? But it's a passion there, right? And when I look at this moment, as crazy as it is, right, in my own experience, being able to do the work that we do is more than gratifying, and people just will not understand why you can't choose your career for what other people may think. Because, you know, Jim Grossman's in the audience. He came to FAMU some years ago. I remember him telling us how, and I use this all the time, he says, you know, the world views professors as teachers, and the only group that doesn't view professors as teachers are professors, right? Like, we see ourselves as researchers and activists and all these other hats because of the passion, right, that we all have. And if you have that, no one can take that from you. And it's hard to explain that to someone else who are motivated by other factors. So you just run your own race. You find the folks who are like-minded and you build a community around them. And you continue to do the work. And in moments like this, your educational training may be called into action, and you respond accordingly when you get that call.
Do we have time for one more? One more. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name's Laura Jeffries, and I've been teaching English at Florida State College at Jacksonville for 20 years. And our college got a little bit of a spotlight a while ago. In January, our college president read out loud the statement representing the 28 state colleges pledging fealty to Ron DeSantis and his anti-DEI initiatives. And that was our college president who read that out loud of the 28. Apparently it wasn't originally slated to be him. So talk about putting a pall or a silence on the faculty and other administrators who haven't wanted to talk about it or press him about it. And there's been precious little discussion of it there. I talk about it all the time, talking about it now. So be it. But because we're a state college, we don't have the same pressures that the high school teachers have of having our job directly on the line. And we also don't get the attention that people at some of the higher tier universities get. So for now, and also connected to what you were saying about no enforcement mechanism for SB 266, we sort of seem to be, I haven't seen anything happen to anybody at my college, and we're a very large institution, except for one person's job title got changed. So there's a question in here, or a comment or a suggestion or something. It is very important what many of us are talking about today, to continue teaching the original curriculum, whether it's, you know, Black history or Latin American history, right? To continue teaching the original curriculum that students came to learn. But in order to bring the fight back to them, if they're laying siege on the institutions, I'm wondering if people are finding ways or think we should find ways to also teach about the current political attacks. As an English teacher, I can kind of teach my research writing class on whatever I want, right? I decide what the theme is. And so I found pretty good success by giving my students options of research topics. Study HB 256 at the time was one of them, HB 999, HB 7. Tell us about the history of or what's happened with the takeover of New College. And my students selected all the topics that I gave them, and they still had other topics they could have selected. They chose to teach each other about it in the class for presentations. And that's really, but that's easy for me to do because of my subject matter. But what I'm wondering for the panel is, are you, in addition to continuing to teach your original subject, are you able to, or do you think it's a good idea to expand so that our students know what's happening right now?
Well, two things before, I just want to respond to two things you said earlier. One is you all are on continuing contracts, so there can be some job security issues in the long term. And two is there's a history professor at your very institution who testified in the HB 233 case, I believe a year ago, who said a supervisor went to him, told him not to teach Reconstruction in his class. And that was at your institution. So there is some things going on at your college, and there is some things going on at the state college you have to be wary of. But I'll defer to my colleagues.
I mean, I think as historians, we do this all the time, right? So we talk about, the boogeyman in politics or dog whistle politics, right? So when Black Studies was created in 1968, 69, you heard the same arguments, an attack on Western Civ, anti-American, right? So we see this is cyclical. It's like a playbook. And we see these. So in our classes, showing the students the sources, wow, this sounds kind of familiar, right? The boogeyman was communism in the 50s, right? LGBTQ, trans, these issues that are used, these wedge issues are used to, create this misinformation. So this is done in all our classes to alert students that this is nothing new. And then they figure out, we don't tell them, they figure out what they want to do. Right. So this whole notion that when Black Studies telling students to join Black Lives Matter, burn down the CBS, we don't do that. Right. That's not what we do. We put out the information. They decide. We tell them voting is important. We don't tell them who to vote for. They decide if they want to vote. They don't. It's on them. Right. So I think there's a lot of misinformation, but Black Studies have always been, I think Robin Kelly, our new book, Black Studies is contraband. It's always been that. Right. But that's not going to stop the mission of what we do. Like any other discipline, there's debates. Economics, Milton Friedman versus John Maynard Keynes, any class, you have a discussion. But sometimes with Black Studies, we want to control the debates. Reparations, every Black Studies scholars don't agree with reparations or how it should be done. That's a debate. So that's what I was been pushing since this whole thing. These are debates in a discipline like any other discipline.
I personally, as I said, we have, Robert is right. We have more security in terms of jobs. I was going up for promotion to full when I sue, and everybody was saying, oh, that's you're crazy and whatever. But personally, I think we need to act in front of our students with freedom. And I think if they perceive fear and they perceive people censoring themselves, you are educating them too. So I personally, and because you had the experience of growing up under a severe dictatorship, I made a commitment with myself. And I noticed that I said, well, make sure I did this or that. I said, what is best for the students, and I will not compromise on that. So I think we can do it because as I said, we are in a different situation. And I honor that, the fact that I have, I'd say privilege, I think it's illegal, but I recognize that and act consequently with that I have things that allow me to do this. And I think we all need to make those, arrangements for ourselves. I think that's a very personal thing that people need to do in terms of what they are doing, what they're doing. I would not, commit myself to teaching censorship. I would never go back to that ever. So it's my obviously reflection on what I experienced. Somebody else can decide something else. But I think we are getting into critical times in which our profession is not easy. And we need to honor that.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but this has been an excellent panel, and let's give another round of applause for our panelists. And I just appreciate everyone asking questions and the great conversations. Thank you very much. I believe it's lunchtime.
Yeah, the quick announcement is lunch is waiting on everyone here in the foyer of the auditorium. So we have a variety of wraps. We have 45 minutes, 1:15, we're back in here. So